Far away from Earth, where the stars looked like shining dust in the endless black sky, something strange happened. It began as a whisper in space, a weak and trembling sound that human machines almost missed. On a quiet night at the Deep Space Listening Station on the Moon, a signal appeared. It was not random noise or natural radiation. It was organized, emotional, almost like a cry. The scientists in the observatory froze. They had heard strange sounds from the universe before. Radio waves from dying stars, echoes from black holes, and the cold whisper of cosmic storms. But this one was different. It carried rhythm, pattern, and something that no computer could explain: emotion. It sounded like fear, pain, and pleading. It was a cry for help. At first, people thought it was a mistake. Maybe some equipment was broken, or some human satellite had reflected old transmissions. But the more they checked, the clearer it became. The signal came from far outside human territory, from a system called Virelia 9, a place with no known colonies or trade routes. Nobody had ever gone there before. It was deep in uncharted space, thousands of light years from Earth. The scientists played the sound again and again. Each time they heard it, something inside them shivered. It was not a language they could understand, but the feeling was unmistakable. It was like hearing someone cry in the dark and not knowing where they were. News of the strange signal spread fast. Within days, it reached Earth, Mars, and the other colonies. People were excited and scared at the same time. Was it aliens? Was it a trap? Or was it the first real contact with another intelligent species that needed help? The media called it the ghost plea. People began arguing on every channel. Some said humans should ignore it. We have enough problems on our own world, they said. Others believed it was destiny, that this was humanity's chance to prove they were not alone and that they could do good in the universe. In the halls of the United Stellar Council, leaders and scientists met to discuss the strange message. The decoding teams tried to understand the language. They used artificial intelligence, linguistic software, and sound pattern analysis. Slowly, they began to see meaning hidden inside the waves. It was like listening to music made of sorrow. Certain tones repeated again and again, forming a message that could be roughly translated as, "Help us. The light is dying. We are not many left." That was all they could understand. The message ended with a long silence, then repeated itself after several hours, weaker each time. It was as if someone or something was trying again and again before their strength ran out. Some experts thought it might be a natural event, like the death of a star. But others, especially those who worked in human psychology, said that no natural process could create something that sounded so full of emotion. It was too desperate, too alive. In coffee shops and classrooms, people talked about it like a mystery story. Maybe they're like us, some said. Maybe they're just scared and want someone to hear them. Children on Mars started sending their own hello messages into the sky. Artists painted pictures of glowing alien cities and broken worlds. But deep inside the science stations, the professionals were serious. They knew this could be something real, something big. Weeks passed. The signal grew weaker. The observatories tracked its location more precisely. It came from a dying star surrounded by dust and debris. That meant the system was collapsing or had been attacked. No human ship had ever gone so far before. It would take months of travel and careful planning. The question became, should we go? Among those who debated were the famous explorers of the United Stellar Fleet. They were known across the galaxy by a name other species had given them long ago, the Deathworlders. The word came from alien. Scientists who had studied Earth and realized it was one of the most dangerous worlds for intelligent life. Humans had evolved surrounded by predators, diseases, storms, and hunger. To survive there, they had to become tough, clever, and relentless. To other peaceful species, humans seemed wild, almost frightening. They were the ones who could live on lava planets and frozen moons. They could adapt to anything, endure anything. And now somewhere far away, another species was calling out for help. Who else but the Deathworlders could survive long enough to reach them? As the news spread, the public divided into two sides. Some said it was foolish to risk human lives for strangers. "We don't even know who they are," argued one senator. "What if they're dangerous? What if this is a trap?" But others, including many soldiers and explorers, believed differently. "If someone is crying for help," said Admiral Rhea Morgan, commander of the fleet, "then we go. That's what makes us human." At the same time, scientists uncovered more about the signal. The source seemed to be moving, slowly changing position as if the world itself was collapsing. They detected strange bursts of radiation from the nearby star. That meant the planet might not survive much longer. Time was running out. On Earth, the debate turned into something bigger than science. It became a test of conscience. People asked themselves what kind of species humanity wanted to be. Were they just explorers seeking resources and glory? Or were they capable of compassion for those beyond their kind? Then something unexpected happened. A small team of engineers from Mars colony decoded an image hidden inside the signal. An ancient method of communication, like a picture made of sound. When they reconstructed it, it showed what looked like a city in flames, with tall crystal-like towers breaking apart under fire. Small glowing shapes, creatures were running toward underground shelters. The scientists were silent for a long time after seeing it. There was no doubt anymore. It was a call from a civilization in danger. That night, across every world where humans lived, people looked up at the stars and wondered who the Varelians were. Nobody knew what they looked like, what language they spoke, or what had destroyed their home. But everyone could feel it. The same ache in their hearts that the first listeners on the moon had felt when they heard that cry. Within days, petitions and messages flooded the United Stellar Council. "Send help," they said. "Don't let them die alone." After long hours of argument, the decision was made. A fleet would go, not to conquer, not to colonize, but to help. For the first time in human history, ships would leave the safety of known space for the sake of another species. The mission was named the Deathworlder Expedition. Engineers began refitting ships for long-distance travel. Cargo bays were filled not with weapons but with medicine, food synthesizers, and rescue drones. Linguists joined the crew hoping to communicate. The entire operation was built in record time, powered by volunteers and donations from every colony. Before departure, Admiral Morgan addressed the fleet. Her words were broadcast across all human worlds. "When we first looked at the stars, we dreamed of meeting others. Now someone out there has called to us not in pride or power, but in fear. And we will answer, because no voice that cries for help should echo into silence." When the fleet engines roared to life, the light of their departure painted the sky above Mars red and gold. Children waved from the domes, shouting blessings. On the moon, the scientists who had first heard the signal watched in awe as humanity took its first step toward becoming not just travelers, but guardians of life beyond their own. As the ships vanished into the dark, the faint cry from Varelia 9 played one last time through the listening stations. It was weaker now, fading like a breath at the end of a song. But for the humans who heard it, it was not just a message, it was a promise. Someone had called and humanity was on its way. The universe, for the first time, would learn what it truly meant when Deathworlders answered a call for help. The name Deathworlders had always carried a strange weight among the stars. Other alien species used it with both fear and respect. To them, humans were not gentle explorers. They were survivors from a planet so dangerous that even its forests, oceans, and skies tried to kill them. On Earth, every creature fought for life. Storms destroyed cities, diseases wiped out millions, and yet humans kept standing. That strength had carried them into space. Now, it would be tested in a way they had never imagined. When the strange distress signal from Varelia 9 reached human space, it didn't just stir curiosity. It sparked a storm of debate. In the grand chambers of the United Stellar Council, people argued day and night. Some leaders saw the call for help as a trap. Others saw it as a duty. Nobody agreed on what to do. Admiral Rhea Morgan sat quietly through most of those arguments. She was a woman who had seen too much war and too much loss. Her ship had once saved an entire colony from destruction during a solar flare, and she had watched brave people die to protect strangers. To her, compassion was not weakness, it was courage. As the others argued, she listened to the faint recordings of the alien cry that had started everything. Each time she played it, she felt her chest tighten. That sound wasn't fake. It wasn't a trick. Someone out there was really suffering. But not everyone agreed. General Kale, a man built like stone and known for his cold logic, stood up during the council meeting and said, "We don't know who they are or what they want. For all we know, it's bait. We could send our ships into an ambush." Another council member, a scientist from Europa Station, shook his head. "Even if it's real, we don't have the technology to reach them fast enough. By the time we arrive, they'll be gone. We'll waste lives for nothing. Around the table, others nodded. Humanity was still recovering from its last great conflict, the Titan Resource War. Supplies were tight. Many colonies were rebuilding. The people were tired of fighting and losing. Sending ships into deep space for strangers seemed foolish to some, but others felt differently. A biologist named Dr. Leona Park spoke next. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. If that signal is real, it means someone out there is capable of feeling pain, fear, and hope just like us. If we ignore it, what does that make us? Her words spread through the room like a spark. Silence followed, and for a moment everyone looked at one another, wondering who they really were as a species. Were they explorers of the unknown or protectors of life? While the leaders argued, the people across the colonies had already made up their minds. On Mars, volunteers gathered outside the spaceports holding signs that said, "Answer the call." On Luna, school children sent messages to the council. Please help the ones who are crying. Even in the mining stations on Jupiter's moons, workers offered to donate materials for rescue ships. Admiral Morgan watched all of this unfold and finally stood before the council. "We were called Deathworlders because we come from a hard world," she said. "Yes, we're dangerous, but not just to our enemies. We're dangerous to despair. We don't run when someone needs us, we fight. That's who we are." The council chamber filled with murmurs. Some faces were uncertain, others inspired. After hours of debate, a vote was taken. The decision was close, just a handful of votes in favor, but it was enough. Humanity would go. The mission was officially named the Deathworlder Response Fleet. 5 ships were chosen for the journey. The ISS Resolute, the Vanguard, the Solaris, the Dauntless, and the Nomad. Each ship had a specific role. Some were built for rescue, some for defense, and others carried scientists and doctors. When the announcement was made public, people cheered across every world. The old fears began to fade, replaced by a quiet pride. For the first time in history, humans weren't going into space to conquer. They were going to save. Preparation began immediately. Engineers worked around the clock in the shipyards orbiting Mars and Titan. They reinforced the hulls to withstand radiation from dying stars. Cargo bays were packed with medical supplies, portable shelters, translation equipment, and energy converters. Artificial intelligence systems were trained on the alien signal, trying to decode as much as possible. Every detail mattered because the fleet would be alone, far beyond any help. At the same time, the fleet's crew was carefully chosen. Soldiers, scientists, linguists, engineers, and medics, all experts, all volunteers. Many of them left behind families who didn't know if they'd ever return. But nobody hesitated. When asked why they were going, one pilot said simply, "Because if we were the ones crying out there, we'd want someone to answer." During those weeks of preparation, a strange energy filled human space. It wasn't fear or excitement, it was purpose. People donated resources freely. The colonies stopped arguing about politics and trade. For the first time in decades, humanity stood united under a single cause: compassion. Still, not everyone trusted the mission. On the dark side of politics, secret groups whispered that it was a mistake. They feared what humans might find. What if these aliens are monsters? One senator asked on a broadcast, "What if they're pretending to be victims to trick us?" But his words fell flat. The universe had already seen too much war, too much suspicion. Humanity needed something to believe in. Admiral Morgan spent long hours with her crew going over every possible danger. The Virelia system was near the edge of a nebula filled with unstable gravity fields and radiation storms. Communication with Earth would be nearly impossible once they crossed the boundary. They would be alone in the dark, guided only by the dying signal. Before departure, Morgan stood before her crew in the docking bay of the ISS Resolute. Thousands of faces looked up at her, tired but determined. She spoke without reading from notes. "Every great story begins with a call. Ours came from across the stars. We don't know who waits for us or what dangers we'll face, but I know this. The measure of a species isn't how far it can travel. It's how deeply it can care. When others cry for help, we answer. That is the Deathworlder way." The words spread through the fleet like fire. Even the toughest soldiers felt their hearts tighten. They were no longer just explorers. They were lifelines. On Earth, millions watched the broadcast as the 5 ships prepared for launch. The engines glowed bright blue, humming with power. Children waved flags, old veterans saluted, and families whispered prayers. Some cried, not out of sadness but pride. As the countdown began, every heart across human space seemed to beat together. 10, 9, 8. The voice echoed through the intercoms, steady and clear. 3, 2, 1. The fleet lifted off. Bright trails of light cut across the dark sky as the ships accelerated toward the edge of known space. The crowd erupted in cheers. Somewhere on Mars, a child whispered, "Go find them." Inside the Resolute, the crew strapped in as the stars blurred around them. The captain's voice came through the speakers. Course set for Varelian 9. Estimated travel time 6 months at slipstream velocity. Then, as the engines roared and space folded around them, humanity left its cradle once more. But this time it wasn't driven by conquest or greed or the hunger for discovery. It was driven by empathy. As the fleet sped through the void, silence returned to the council chambers on Earth. Those who had doubted now stared at the empty sky, wondering if they had made the right choice. General Kyle, the one who had warned of traps, finally spoke softly to no one in particular. "I hope they find what they're looking for." Meanwhile, far ahead of them, the faint distress signal continued to pulse through the dark. It had grown weaker, slower, like a heartbeat fading. Every time the scientists on board listened to it, they were reminded of why they had come. There were quiet moments during the journey when doubt crept in. The space between stars was vast, cold, and empty. 6 months of travel through nothingness tested even the strongest minds. But each time morale began to drop, Admiral Morgan would replay the original message through the speakers. That sad, trembling sound filled the ship and everyone fell silent. It reminded them that somewhere out there someone was waiting. The journey bonded them in ways no training could. Soldiers shared stories with scientists. Engineers played cards with medics. They became a family. They laughed, argued, and dreamed together. They began to imagine what the Varelians might look like. Creatures of light, perhaps, or delicate beings made of mist. Nobody knew, but everyone felt that meeting them would change everything. As the fleet neared the edge of human-mapped space, the stars began to look different. Strange colors rippled in the distance, signs of radiation storms and collapsing systems. The navigation officers worked non-stop to keep the ship safe. At one point, they passed a drifting asteroid field glowing faintly with crystal dust. It was beautiful but haunting, a reminder of how fragile life could be. Finally, after months of travel, the signal grew stronger again. It was weak but clearer, pulsing like a heartbeat calling them home. The crew cheered. They had found the right path. No one knew what waited for them beyond that dying star, but there was no turning back. Humanity had made its choice. The Deathworlder fleet was on its way, not as conquerors but as protectors, answering the cry of a world they had never seen, for lives they had never met, guided only by compassion in the endless dark. When the Deathworlder fleet finally arrived at Varelia 9, silence filled every ship. For months they had traveled through endless darkness, chasing a voice that cried for help. Now the destination was before them, but it was not what they had hoped to find. The moment their sensors scanned the planet, everyone in the control rooms went still. The world below was burning. Varelia 9, once believed to be a shining world of green oceans and crystal skies, was now a graveyard. The surface was covered in dark clouds and rivers of fire. The star it orbited was unstable, flashing with violent bursts of radiation. From space, the planet looked like a wounded heart, broken and bleeding light. Captain Wren from the ship Solaris whispered, "Is anyone even alive down there?" But the answer came seconds later as the fleet's computers detected faint energy signatures below the surface. Life, weak, almost gone, but still there. Admiral Rhea Morgan stood at the command window of her ship, the Resolute, and watched the planet's glowing storms. "They're underground," she said softly. "They must have gone below to survive." Her officers exchanged nervous glances. Going down there would be dangerous. The atmosphere was filled with radiation, the air toxic and the surface unstable. But none of them hesitated. This was why they had come. The fleet entered orbit and began scanning for safe landing zones. There were none. Whole cities had collapsed into ashes. Towering spires of alien architecture, once beautiful, were now melted ruins. Broken ships floated in orbit, their hulls marked by heavy weapon fire. It wasn't just a dying planet, it was a destroyed one. Someone had done this deliberately. That discovery changed everything. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was an attack. Admiral Morgan called a fleet meeting through holographic transmission. Faces from all 5 ships appeared before her. "We have confirmed the presence of survivors beneath the surface," she said. "But this world was bombarded. There are enemy wrecks everywhere. Whoever attacked them may still be out there." Commander Lee from the Vanguard frowned. "Do we engage if they return?" Morgan paused. "Our mission is rescue, not war. But if we must fight to protect the survivors, then we will." The crews prepared landing shuttles. Every person who volunteered for the ground mission had to sign a declaration acknowledging the risk. The air could kill them, the radiation could poison them, and the planet could collapse at any moment. Yet hundreds volunteered without hesitation. When the first shuttles descended through the burning clouds, the crew held their breath. The sky of Verelion 9 was a swirling storm of orange and red. Lightning cracked between the clouds and ash fell like black snow. The ships shuddered as they broke through turbulence. Inside, the soldiers and medics stared out the windows in silence, watching a nightmare unfold below. The first sight of the surface left them speechless. The land was cracked and glowing like the skin of a dying beast. What had once been cities were now skeletons of metal and stone. They found strange towers bent in half and glass domes shattered into dust. Rivers boiled where they once flowed, and giant shadows moved beneath the smoke. Machines that had long stopped working. As the teams moved forward, they found something even more haunting. Shapes of creatures frozen in place turned to ash mid-run. It was as if the whole planet had been caught in a single moment of terror. Dr. Leona Park, who led the biology unit, whispered, "They were alive during the bombardment. They didn't even have time to hide." She knelt beside one of the remains, a fragile, shimmering skeleton, unlike anything human. The bones were thin and almost transparent, as if made of light crystal. "They weren't built for war," she said quietly. "They were artists, builders." Hours later, the rescue teams finally detected life deep underground. Using seismic scanners, they found tunnels and caverns hidden miles beneath the surface. There, faint energy signals flickered like candle flames in a storm. The Deathworlders started digging. Massive machines were deployed from orbit, cutting through layers of debris and stone. Days passed. Every minute mattered because the planet was falling apart. Volcanic eruptions shook the ground and radiation storms swept across the surface. Still, they worked without rest. Finally, they broke through into a huge underground chamber. The light from their helmets revealed hundreds of glowing figures huddled together. The Verelians were alive, but barely. The humans stared in wonder. The Verelians were unlike anything they had imagined. They were tall and thin, their bodies covered in soft, luminous patterns that shimmered with emotion. Their faces had no eyes or mouths as humans understood them, but their skin pulsed gently with color. Blue for calm, red for fear, and white for hope. They communicated through light and faint musical tones like whispers of wind. When the first human stepped forward, the Verelians drew back in fear. To them, the Deathworlders looked terrifying. Heavy suits, metal armor, harsh breathing masks. But one of the human medics, a woman named Tessa, removed her helmet slowly, ignoring the radiation warning. She knelt and reached out her hand. The Verelians hesitated, their bodies flickering with confusion. Then one of them, a small one, maybe a child, moved closer and touched her gloved hand. The glow in its body shifted to soft gold. The room filled with a gentle hum like the sound of relief. That moment changed everything. The humans began giving food, medicine, and water. Portable shelters were built, radiation shields installed. Communication was hard at first, but the linguists worked non-stop, trying to understand their color-based language. They discovered that the signal humanity had received months earlier was sent by a dying Verelian scientist who had used the last of his power to broadcast a message across the stars. The words he encoded meant, "We are falling. Help us before the light goes out." The survivors told a tragic story through gestures and glowing patterns. Their world had been attacked by machines from deep space, unmanned war fleets left from an ancient war they never fought in. The machines had mistaken their energy-based cities for weapons and unleashed total destruction. The Verelians had no defense. They were peaceful and gentle, creatures of art and song. They had watched their skies burn as their world died. Listening to this, many of the humans clenched their fists. Soldiers who had seen war before found themselves blinking back tears. These beings weren't enemies. They were victims, Days turned into weeks as the rescue continued. The fleet worked tirelessly, evacuating survivors and transporting them to safe orbit. Engineers built stabilization towers to stop the planet from collapsing too soon. For the first time, the Varelians saw the Deathworlders not as monsters from a harsh world, but as saviors who refused to give up. But Varelia 9 was not finished dying. Radiation levels kept rising. The ground shook constantly, and strange energy storms began tearing through the tunnels. The fleet scientists warned that the planet would become uninhabitable within a month. One night, a massive tremor hit the main rescue zone. Rocks fell and part of the cavern collapsed. A group of Varelians was trapped behind tons of debris. Without thinking, a team of humans rushed in to save them. The medics screamed for them to stop. It was too dangerous, but they didn't listen. Hours later, when the dust cleared, the trapped aliens were safe. The humans who saved them were not. Their names were later carved onto a memorial aboard the Resolute. The Varelians learned something that day, something they had never seen before. They were a species that avoided harm at all costs. They didn't fight or sacrifice. They simply fled. But when they saw the Deathworlders risk their own lives for strangers, something inside them changed. Their skin glowed with a new color, a deep violet that human translators later called reverence. Soon, the Varelian survivors began helping the humans in return. They guided them through tunnels, shared energy crystals, and sang soft tones that calmed fear. The bond between them grew stronger. Then one morning, as the fleet prepared the final evacuation ships, an alert blared through the system. Unknown contacts had entered orbit. At first they thought it was debris or old satellites, but then the readings became clear. A fleet of machines was approaching. The same kind that had destroyed Varelia 9 was coming back to finish the job. On board the Resolute, alarms rang. Admiral Morgan's voice cut through the noise. All ships prepare for defensive formation. We hold this position until the last survivor is off that planet. Down below, the rescue teams looked up at the sky, which had begun to glow with strange flashes. The soldiers tightened their gear. The medics hurried the Varelians toward the transports. No one spoke. They all knew what was coming. As the first mechanical warships appeared through the clouds, huge and silent, the Deathworlders raised their weapons, not for conquest, but for protection. Humanity had found the ones who had cried for help. Now they would make sure those cries were never silenced again. The alarm echoed through every corridor of the Deathworlder fleet. Red lights flashed, voices shouted orders, and screens filled with the terrifying sight of the enemy ships approaching. The machines had returned. They were enormous, cold metallic giants drifting through space like silent predators. Their surfaces were covered with scars from ancient battles, and their weapons glowed with a deadly red light. They didn't send warnings, didn't communicate. They simply advanced toward Varelia 9, ready to finish what they had started long ago. Inside the command deck of the Resolute, Admiral Rhea Morgan stood tall, her eyes locked on the main screen. "How many?" she asked. 30 confirmed ships, Admiral," replied her officer. "Maybe more behind them. Automated war class. No biological signatures. They're drones." Morgan clenched her jaw. "Machines." Just as the Varelians said. Everyone knew what that meant. Machines had no fear, no mercy, and no reason to stop. They would destroy anything that moved. The communication line crackled with voices from the other ships. Commander Lee of the Vanguard said, "Orders, Admiral? Do we retreat?" For a long moment, Morgan didn't answer. She looked at the planet below, where thousands of Varelian survivors were still being evacuated. The thought of leaving them behind twisted her heart. "No," she said finally. "We don't run. Not while they're still down there. We hold this line." The bridge went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. They would fight, not for conquest or victory, but for protection. The message was sent across the fleet. Hold position. Defend the evacuation. No one gets left behind. On the surface of Varelia 9, the sky began to glow red as the first enemy ships entered the atmosphere. The rescue teams looked up and saw streaks of fire falling through the clouds. Soldiers shouted, "Incoming!" and rushed the last groups of Varelians into transports. Medics worked frantically to stabilize the weak and wounded. From orbit, the Deathworlder fleet opened fire. Blue energy beams and missile trails cut through the darkness, colliding with the enemy's red light. The first few drone ships exploded, lighting up space like fireworks. But for every one destroyed, more appeared. The machines moved with cold precision. They didn't fight like humans. They didn't dodge or retreat. They just kept advancing, firing from all sides. The sky turned into chaos. Inside the Resolute, alarms blared as the ship shook from impacts. "Shields at 60%, shouted the technician. "Return fire. Focus on their command cores," Morgan ordered. The humans fought fiercely, using every trick they knew. They had always been called Deathworlders because they came from a world that demanded strength and creativity to survive. And now they showed it. The Vanguard performed a risky maneuver, flipping upside down in mid-space to fire missiles directly beneath the enemy's formation. The Dauntless used its damaged engine to lure drones into an ambush by the Solaris. Every ship worked together, each move perfectly timed. On the ground, things were just as desperate. The Varelians, though weak and fragile, refused to abandon the humans who had saved them. Many of them helped carry injured soldiers back to the shuttles. Some used their glowing energy to power broken shields or scanners. Their soft hums filled the tunnels, steadying panicked hearts. One soldier, covered in dust and blood, looked at a young Varelian child clutching his hand. "Don't worry," he said with a shaky smile. "We Deathworlders don't die easy." Above them, Admiral Morgan made a bold decision. "All ships form the Iron Wall. Protect the evacuation zone at all costs." The fleet rearranged itself into a defensive formation, surrounding the planet like a glowing shield. Every ship took heavy damage, but they held firm. Explosions lit up the darkness, painting the space around Varelia 9 with red and blue light. The Solaris took a direct hit and began losing altitude. Its engines flared and smoke filled the corridors. The captain shouted into the radio, "We're hit. We can't hold." Morgan's voice came back, strong and calm. "You've done your duty, Solaris. Evacuate the crew. We'll cover you." But the Solaris captain refused. "Negative, Admiral. We're not leaving yet. We still have guns left." The ship turned sharply and rammed into an enemy vessel twice its size, destroying them both in a brilliant explosion. The fleet watched in silence. One of their own was gone, but so was part of the enemy. On the surface, the final shuttles began to lift off. Soldiers carried the last survivors aboard. "Go, go, go!" shouted the commanders. The ground cracked beneath them as the planet trembled. Time was running out. Meanwhile, the machines sent a new wave of attackers. These were smaller, faster, and more vicious. They darted between ships, trying to pierce through the defense line. The Deathworlders adapted instantly. Pilots turned their ships to block enemy paths, sacrificing shields to protect the evacuation corridor. Every second felt endless. The fleet was battered and breaking. Ammunition was running low. The Dauntless lost one of its engines, spinning out of control before stabilizing. The Nomad's communication system was destroyed, forcing its crew to use signal lights to coordinate. Still, no one surrendered. Inside the command deck of the Resolute, an officer shouted, "Admiral, the last transport is leaving the surface." Morgan exhaled, relief flashing across her face. "All right, pull them out." But before they could retreat, a massive shadow appeared behind the enemy fleet. A colossal machine ship, larger than any they had seen, emerged from hyperspace. Its core glowed like a small sun. Sensors screamed warnings. Its weapon could destroy everything within thousands of kilometers. Morgan stared at it. If that thing fires, the whole planet is gone. Her officers waited for orders, fear in their eyes. She made her choice. "Prepare the Resolute for a ramming course." "Admiral, you can't—" "We don't have a choice," she shouted. "If that ship fires, everything we've done means nothing." Her crew went silent, then nodded. They knew her well enough to understand. Deathworlders didn't back down. As the Resolute's engines roared, the Admiral sent one last message to the fleet. "Protect the survivors." "That's an order." The other captains protested, but she had already cut the channel. The Resolute turned toward the massive machine ship. It was like a tiny spark flying into the mouth of a dragon. Morgan gripped the control lever herself, her voice calm as she whispered, "Let's show them what Deathworlders are made of." The Resolute's engines glowed brighter than ever before, pushing it to maximum speed. The giant machine began to charge its weapon, but it was too late. The Resolute slammed into its core, and for a heartbeat, space lit up like a new sunrise. The explosion tore through the enemy formation, ripping apart ships and scattering debris across orbit. When the light faded, the great machine ship was gone, and so was the Resolute. The remaining human ships, damaged but alive, watched in silence. The enemy fleet, leaderless and disoriented, began to fall apart. Some drones shut down, others fled into deep space. Humanity had done the impossible. They had defended the helpless and defeated a fleet that should have been unstoppable. On the ground, the Varelians saw the explosion through the clouds. Their glowing bodies shimmered with emotion. They didn't have words for what they felt, but every color on their skin brightened into a radiant gold. They understood that the humans had given everything to save them. When the battle was over, the surviving ships gathered what was left of the Resolute. They found only fragments drifting in space, a broken insignia, a damaged flag, a recording. In the recording, Admiral Morgan's voice said softly, "If someone ever asks what it means to be human, tell them this. We fought for those who couldn't fight, and we didn't stop until the light was safe." The words spread through the fleet like fire. Some cried. Others saluted. Every ship lowered its flag in honor of the fallen. The evacuation ships carried the last of the Varelians away from their dying world. Behind them, Varelia 9 cracked apart, the surface splitting as the planet finally gave in. But this time its death wasn't silent. It ended under the protection of those who had answered its call. As the fleet turned toward home, the stars reflected off their hulls, and the survivors looked back one last time. The Varelians, weak but alive, pressed their glowing hands against the glass, their colors shifting into soft white, the color of peace. In that quiet moment, everyone on the ships felt something change. They had gone into the unknown as explorers, but they were returning as something more, as proof that mercy could survive even in the harshest hearts. The legend of the Deathworlders would spread across the galaxy, not as destroyers, but as defenders. And though Admiral Rhea Morgan was gone, her spirit traveled with them, carried in every heartbeat, in every whisper of light. Because when the helpless cried for help, humanity did not turn away. They fought, they bled, and they stood their ground until hope itself was safe once more. Years had passed since the great battle over Varelia 9, but the memory of it still lived in every corner of the galaxy. The story of the Deathworlders, the humans who had come from a harsh, dangerous world, had become something close to legend. People spoke their names with awe and respect. Some called them saviors. Others whispered that they were too powerful, too unpredictable. But no matter what anyone thought, no one could deny one truth. When the helpless had cried for help, the Deathworlders had answered. The surviving ships of the EO fleet returned to the human colonies carrying more than just wounded soldiers. They carried the survivors of Varelia 9, the way. Varelians were fragile beings of light and energy, and most humans had never seen such creatures before. When they arrived, the human crowds watched in silence as the glowing figures stepped onto the station platforms. They were weak and trembling, but alive. A small boy broke the silence by running forward and touching the light on one Varelian's arm. "It's warm," he whispered, eyes wide. The alien looked down and smiled, the light on its face pulsing gently. That simple moment, one small human hand reaching out to a being from another world, marked the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. The alliance between humans and Varelians became something stronger than treaties or politics. It became a bond written in sacrifice and gratitude. The Varelians built shrines of light on human worlds, glowing memorials that shimmered with soft colors. Each shrine carried a single phrase written in both their languages. They answered the call. Every year on the day of the battle, the lights across the colonies dimmed for 1 minute. In that silence, people remembered Admiral Rhea Morgan and the crew of the Resolute. Children learned about her in school as a symbol of courage. Artists painted her image surrounded by stars. Some even said that if you looked long enough into the night sky, you could still see a faint golden glow where her ship had fallen. But even legends couldn't stop the scars of war from showing. The Deathworlder fleet had been nearly destroyed. Many soldiers carried physical wounds, and others bore the heavy weight of loss. Some found it hard to return to normal life. Commander Lee, who had served under Morgan, often stood on the observation decks of the new flagship, staring at the stars. "We won," he would say quietly. "But we left a part of ourselves out there." Despite the pain, humanity changed for the better. Before the Varelian crisis, humans had been divided. Different nations, different fleets, always arguing over power and territory. But after the battle, they were united. The fleet that had once been made up of separate factions was now one, the United Deathworlder Defense Force. Their new mission was not conquest or exploration. but protection. They swore that no cry for help would ever go unanswered again. The Varelians helped them rebuild. Their technology, though peaceful, was advanced in ways humanity had never imagined. They taught humans how to harness light energy for healing and communication. In return, humans shared their methods of survival, engineering, and defense. Together they created something new, a merging of fire and light, of strength and peace. The galaxy noticed. Other alien civilizations that had once feared humans now began to reach out. Some sent messages of alliance. Others asked for help rebuilding their own broken worlds. Slowly, humanity began to shift from a feared species to a respected one. They were still called Deathworlders, but now the name carried pride instead of fear. It meant protectors, guardians of the helpless. Among the Varelians, one name shone brighter than all others: Rhea Morgan. They sang songs about her in their glowing temples. Their children were taught that she had carried the light of their people into the stars. One Varelian poet wrote, "She burned like the sun so we could live beneath its warmth." Back on Earth, a monument was built in her honor, a massive tower of silver and glass shaped like a rising flame. Inside the tower, holograms showed the faces of everyone who had fallen in the battle. Visitors from all species came there to pay respect. Some brought flowers. Others left small pieces of metal or crystal, symbols of their own worlds. The monument's base carried a message written by Morgan herself from her final transmission. "If someone ever asks what it means to be human, tell them this: we fought for those who couldn't fight." In the years that followed, the galaxy changed faster than anyone had expected. Peace treaties were signed, trade routes reopened, and interspecies councils were formed to prevent another tragedy like Varelia 9. The Deathworlder fleet became the backbone of this peace, not through intimidation but through trust. Whenever danger appeared, pirates, rogue machines, or natural disasters, the sight of the fleet's blue insignia brought hope. Yet deep in the unexplored corners of space, the silence of the destroyed machine fleet left an uneasy feeling. Some believed the machines were truly gone, wiped out by Morgan's sacrifice, but others weren't so sure. Strange signals sometimes flickered in distant systems, patterns of light that matched the machine code. The fleet monitored them constantly, prepared for the worst. Humanity had learned one thing clearly: peace must always be protected. Commander Lee eventually became Admiral Lee, taking command of the new flagship, the Resolute 2. On its first mission, he gathered his crew and said, "We're not just soldiers anymore. We're keepers of hope." His words echoed through the decks, and every crew member felt the weight of their duty. During one patrol near the Varelian home system, Lee received a message from the Varelian Council. A small shimmering figure appeared on his communication screen, a child who had once been rescued during the battle. The child, now grown, said, "Admiral, we found something." It was a piece of the original Resolute, floating quietly in the debris field. When the recovery team brought it aboard, they discovered that inside the twisted metal was a single glowing sphere, a black box recorder. When they activated it, Admiral Morgan's voice played once more, faint but clear. "If you are hearing this, it means you survived. Remember why we fought. Remember who we did it for." The room fell silent. Some cried. Some smiled. And Admiral Lee stood there whispering, "We remember, Admiral, always." The recording was later placed inside the monument on Earth. Visitors could touch a glass panel and hear her voice, just as it had been that day. For many, it became a symbol, not just of war, but of unity, sacrifice, and hope. Over time, new generations grew up hearing the stories. To them, the Deathworlders were heroes from a time when darkness had nearly swallowed the stars. But older veterans, those who had been there, knew it was more than a story. They had seen friends fall, had felt ships tremble beneath their feet, had made choices that still haunted them. To them, it was a reminder of what it cost to protect life, and yet, despite all the pain, they never regretted answering that call. Decades later, when the first joint human Varelian colony ship set off to explore beyond known space, it carried on its hull the combined symbols of both species, a blue star and a ring of light. Before departure, the captain, a young woman descended from the Morgan family line, gave a speech. "Our ancestors fought for a single cry for help," she said. "Let this ship be our promise that we will always listen when someone cries again." The crowd cheered as the ship's engines ignited. From orbit, it looked like a spark flying into the darkness. just like the Resolute once had. The Varelians watched from their luminous cities, their glowing forms shining brighter than ever. The humans watched from their colonies, proud and hopeful. Across countless worlds, billions looked up at the same stars, united by a shared story, the story of the day when aliens cried for help, and the Deathworlders answered. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of known space, the light from that final explosion over Virelia 9 still traveled through the void. Perhaps on some distant world, a child would look up and see it one day, a faint golden shimmer moving through the dark. And maybe they would feel something deep inside, something warm and unexplainable, as if a voice were whispering through the stars, "You are not alone." Because that was what humanity had left behind. Not just destruction or victory, but a promise. A promise that life, no matter how fragile or strange, was worth fighting for. The machines may have been silent, the battles long over, but the legacy of that day continued to echo through the galaxy. It wasn't written in history books or stored in data archives. It was written in hearts, in every act of kindness, every rescue, every decision to stand up for someone weaker. And so, long after the flames of war faded and the stars themselves shifted, the legend endured. Whenever someone spoke of the Deathworlders, they didn't speak of war. They spoke of hope, courage, and sacrifice. They spoke of the time when even the most feared beings in the galaxy became its greatest protectors. And somewhere, perhaps in that endless sea of stars, Admiral Rhea Morgan's spirit watched over them still, her light forever guiding those who dared to answer when the universe cried for help.